The Things They Carried is a story within a book called The Things They Carried. It is set in the midst of the Vietnam War with a focus on a man named Lieutenant Jimmy Cross and his men. In this story, the men come to face many horrific things, and we get to see how each individual responds and copes with these things. Throughout the story, there's a focal point placed on the things that each man carries, not only being limited to just physical objects. However, there is a sense of individuality that is shown by the physical objects that one carries. For example, Ted Lavender relied on substances to numb himself in order to be able to get through the horrors of war. On the other hand, some, like Kiowa, carry nothing but a Bible and rely on their faith to get them through. There is also an abundant weight of emotional burdens that each soldier carries. Lieutenant Cross carries an immense amount of love and a hate for a woman he only briefly met back home. The thought of her consumes him and leads to another great burden he carries, which is guilt. After the loss of Ted Lavender, Jimmy grieved his death very intimately. One of the most apparent themes throughout the passage is that all people process trauma and grief differently. Jimmy becomes extremely depressed and has extreme feelings of guilt due to his self-assigned blame regarding Ted's death. This is clear in the passage when it says, quote, they marched for several hours through the hot afternoon, and then at dusk, while Kiowa explained how Lavender died, Lieutenant Cross found himself trembling. He tried not to cry. With his entrenching tool, which weighed 5 pounds, he began digging a hole in the earth. He felt shame. He hated himself. He had loved Martha more than his men, and as a consequence, Lavender was now dead, and this was something he would have to carry like a stone in his stomach for the rest of the war. End quote. Jimmy blamed himself for allowing Martha to occupy his mind, distracting himself from the war. Kiowa, on the other hand, expresses his emotions very differently. He is not sad, even though at times he wants to be. He is simply put into a state of shock. In this state of utter shock, he repeatedly tells his fellow soldiers what it was like when Ted died. It is apparent that he is in a true state of shock when the thought of Ted's body falling completely occupies his mind, leading him to make his fellow soldiers feel annoyed and uncomfortable. We see this in the passage when it says, quote, I swear to God, boom, down, not a word. I've heard this, said Norman Bowker. A pisser, you know, still zipping himself up, zapped while zipping. All right, fine, that's enough. Yeah, but you had to see it. The guy just, I heard, man, cement, so why not shut the fuck up? End quote. Another way emotion is expressed is through numbness or carelessness through Norman Bowker. Norman Bowker is seemingly unfazed by the death of Ted. It appears as though he views it as a part of the war, and it comes completely unsurprisingly to him. It shows this in the passage when it says, quote, after a time, Kiowa sighed. One thing was for sure, he said. The lieutenant's in some deep hurt. I mean, that crying jag, the way he was carrying on, it wasn't fake or anything. It was real, heavy-duty hurt. The man cares. Sure, Norman Bowker said. Say what you want. The man does care. We all got problems. Not Lavender. No, I guess not, Bowker said. Do me a favor, though. Shut up. That's a smart Indian. Shut up. Bowker shows his seemingly blatant unconcern for others' feelings so visibly that it could quite possibly all be a facade. Bowker could be so traumatized that the only way he keeps it together is to pretend like he doesn't care. The passage, along with the rest of the story, is written in third person omniscient, allowing the reader to read the thoughts of each character. O'Brien surely did this purposefully to allow the reader to have a more in-depth understanding of what the characters are going through and dealing with internally. There is not much figurative language throughout the passage. However, the story is written in such a way to mimic the way the soldiers would actually talk. The language used adds to the heavy undertone of gloom, trauma, and grief. To wrap things up, this passage holds a high level of significance to the story. It shows how the characters view themselves, the wars, and each other. The passage goes to show that serious trauma can affect people in many different ways. It can completely change one's perspective and cause them to change for the better, or it can send them into a downward spiral of shock and numbness.